Okay, so this is the part of our little ceremony where I want to just say a few words about the vision of the Commonwealth Interfaith Network and why I think it's a valid project for this time on the planet and what I think it can offer to this troubled world. We're here in July 2014 when all the athletes of Commonwealth nations have come to Glasgow. It's a great honour for Glasgow to host this event. And I've been watching some of the events on the television. I saw the opening ceremony with the Queen and a display of what Scotland's about. And I think it's a very moving experience for Scotland at a time of importance in her own destiny. And the world seems to be passing through a kind of critical phase at the moment. Some people say that man lives through a series of initiatory experiences as we go from childhood to old age and death. It seems that life is a process. There's no fixed, static thing. I think this is the point that Buddha was trying to make when he said there's no permanent abiding self. There's no fixed thing you can point at. The minute it's pointed at, it's already moved on. Heraclitus, the Greek philosopher, said everything is in flux and flow. The Taoists say the same thing. And Christians say the same with the concept of the Holy Spirit, which is the flowingness of God. The challenge of peace on the planet seems to be how we can steer that flow in creative and non-catastrophic ways. If we think of it in the parable of a tsunami, we've got a series of tsunamis going on metaphysically. And somehow it seems to me the faith leaders of the world, the spiritual leaders, and let's say the genuine intellectuals of the planet, the sages, have a duty to somehow help moderate the tremendous energies of change and flux and flow, these tsunamis, in positive and creative ways. Now, the Commonwealth was born out of many, many centuries of tsunamis. I mean, I grew up partly in England. I've lived in Wales. I've lived in Canada. I was born in Canada, which is one of the great Commonwealth countries. It's the second largest country on the planet. And I've known people from Australia, from New Zealand. My mother travelled in Australia and New Zealand in the 1930s. Each of the countries of the Commonwealth has an incredible history. India, perhaps, has contributed more to the spiritual history of mankind than any other single Commonwealth country. I've travelled in India 7 times, and it's inexhaustible in its spiritual depths. It's where Guru Nanak came from, the Hindu rishis, the Vedas, the Upanishads, but also Buddha and Mahavira, the Jain. I've been many times to meet with Buddhists and Jains and Hindus in India, and they've all inspired the idea of a Commonwealth Interfaith Network. It seems to me also in Pakistan we have the great Sufi lineages from the Indian subcontinent of India. And in the Commonwealth, therefore, we have also primal religions like the Australian Aboriginal religion or the Maori and the Canadian Indian, which is one that I've particularly been interested in, the tradition of Deganawida, the great peace elder of the Canadian Indians and American Indians. It seems to me that each tradition, each culture, has like jewels to offer to mankind as a whole. And when I was invited once to the Commonwealth Interfaith Observance at Westminster Abbey, which the Queen organises every year, it struck me, why don't we have an interfaith, a permanent forum for faith leaders, not just a one-off event every year? And that's why in the Commonwealth Heads of Government meeting in Edinburgh, at New College, we set this thing up with people from South Africa. The South African flag is here in this great hall, and India and all different Commonwealth countries. So, more recently, some new countries that historically didn't have ties to the British Empire or Commonwealth, but wanted to join the Commonwealth because it's an association of free nations that adhere to certain common values. And that includes Rwanda, which lived through the most horrendous violence, and Namibia, Southwest Africa. So I think my proposal, which I've made publicly in the last few days, is that the Commonwealth should extend its welcome to a new state of Palestine, of Gaza and the West Bank, which is suffering horrendous violence and conflict with Israel, its neighbour. Now, I've travelled in both Israel and Palestine. I have friends on both sides of the communities. And it seems to me if Palestine were to join the Commonwealth, it would give her the facilities to build a new state, access to technical advice, engineering, infrastructure advice. I mean, they desperately need a railway to connect the two parts of their country. They need a port, they need an airport. All of this could be provided by Commonwealth assistance. The precondition would be a peace treaty between the new state of Palestine and the state of Israel, a permanent, non-violent, non-aggression treaty, which diplomats could negotiate. I don't think it's beyond the intelligence of mankind to solve these conflicts. And just as our negative karma creates them, so we can access, I believe, positive karma to solve them. This is the point of Buddhas, the point of gurus, the point of sages and prophets. And if there are any still left on this planet and not just stuck in books, then my view is they need to get active and get delivering the goods, which is, the spiritual light, the spiritual wisdom. And I've met some of them in my own interfaith work. When I lived in London, I travelled around the world in about 30 countries and was Secretary General of a big interfaith group, the World Conference on Religion and Peace, for 10 years. I went to events at the Vatican and Vienna and all over the place, meeting, I would say, living saints, some of them, from all traditions, Buddhist, Islamic, Hindu and so on, which inspired me with faith. And met the Duke of Edinburgh sitting on an interfaith publishing project, and at the time he was organising interfaith events in Assisi to do with the environment, which is another big issue the Commonwealth can help with. So I think, some people say no, the problems of the world can only be solved by science. Religion is outmoded, it's no longer necessary. In fact, it's the problem. Religious people are kind of antediluvian people that should be kind of got rid of because they're causing all the wars. And what we need is science. Now, that was a 19th century idea. That was when Darwin and people were saying that science will work out reality and solve all the problems of the world. That gave birth to Marxism and that kind of progressive idea that science would bring illumination. The trouble is, we've had 100 years of that, and it actually hasn't delivered. Pure science alone leads to power, certainly, as Francis Bacon said, but it's neutral in how it's applied. A colleague of mine, Professor Cedric Smith, was someone who knew an awful lot about genetic science, and he knew what happened at Auschwitz with Nazi medical experiments on inmates in the name of science. Pure knowledge, if it's not blended with ethics and some kind of conscience, can become just a will to dominate, a will to power, and a will to advance the ego of one's own tribe or people at the expense of other people. And all around the world we see the tragic consequences of the misuse of science. So I think, personally, the reason for having a Commonwealth Interfaith Network, the reason for interfaith work in general, is to balance and harmonise out that quest for knowledge that science has with a quest for faith. Fritjof Schuon, the great Sufi, says mere intellect cannot find ultimate truth because it's always hungry, it's the monkey mind. One day it has to shut up and listen to a higher level of knowing, which is a place of faith, which transcends, the sort of the minutiae of what the intellect can deliver. Kant said, the greatest thing the intellect can do is work out that it has limits, and that to transcend them it has to go to spirit. Last night I had a dream, which I want to end by sharing, about the role of the Holy Spirit. As a Christian and a universal philosopher, I've always been very interested in the concept of the Holy Spirit. I would say without a doubt it was the concept of the Holy Spirit that made me first take Christianity seriously. In the Greek concept of the Trinity, the Spirit, the pneuma, is the living force which binds the Father and the Son, let's say the transcendent and the immanent, which is what the Father and Son stand for. So the Holy Spirit is the feminine aspect of God, the Shekinah, or the goddess. Most Christians don't realise it's a feminine noun, the Holy Spirit, so it should be referred to as she, the Ruach HaKodesh in Hebrew and Aramaic. And in the dream last night it was revealed to me that there was a saying in Old English, Anglo-Saxon, which I'm a fan of, like Tolkien, I love Anglo-Saxon. And the Holy Spirit gleeth where it toucheth. That was what was revealed to me in my dream. Now, so far as I know, the word gleeth may or may not have existed in Anglo-Saxon, but it certainly existed in my dream last night. And what it means is it brings glee. It's the verb of glee. Now, glee is intense joy or delight, right? So to glee something means to make it come alive with joy. And if the Holy Spirit gleeth where it toucheth, then I think that's a beautiful, let's say, a dream revelation. I kind of like, a lot of my learning goes on in the dream life, because I think when one is totally still and sort of out of body, as it were, you can receive teachings from a higher place than in normal consciousness. So to me this was a kind of transcendental teaching, that the Spirit is that energy or force that can bring glee. And I would say even situations like in Syria or in Gaza, where people, as I speak, are literally being blown to pieces. Now that is a symbol of entropy. That's the force that is anti-life or anti-glee. When you literally dismember a body, or you destroy a culture or a building or a town, it's the opposite of gleeing. And it seems to me, it's a force that is counter to the life force. So if we're going to try and rebuild these shattered cities, like in Gaza, or in Syria, in Aleppo and Damascus, and Raqqa, where recently 2 women were stoned to death, alleged committing adultery, and in Syria recently people have been crucified, in a kind of horrific mockery of the Christian faith. This kind of reversion to subhuman values, I think, is why the Commonwealth Interfaith Network and other interfaith groups around the world should be saying enough is enough. And we should be asking, what is the force or energy that, like the Holy Spirit, brings unity and remembering? If dismembering breaks apart, then remembering puts back together again. And it seems to me that in traditional Christian theology, that's what the Holy Spirit does. It brings a remembrance of the divine realm. And my question I'd like to leave people with is, what theologically would be the equivalent of the Holy Spirit in all faiths? I know there is something equivalent in Judaism, the Ruach HaKodesh, it's in the Kabbalah, it's the absolutely central secret narrative underpinning the biblical tradition. I know that it's there in Islam, because Islam says that it was the Holy Spirit that inspired Muhammad, who was the Ruh Allah, the Spirit from God. And so that, and in many parts of the world, people nowadays regard themselves as spiritual but not religious. Often they'll put on forms, yes, I'm spiritual but I'm not religious. Well, the Holy Spirit is the core essence of what that means. What is it to be spiritual? St. Paul said, and his window's up here in the castle overlooking where we're sitting, there are different kinds of spirits. Test them. There are such things as kind of negative spirits. Just because you're disembodied doesn't mean you're necessarily enlightened or necessarily, fulfilling the highest dharma. So the Holy Spirit is the question I leave people thinking about. How can we access that through all the different faiths, and then to get on and do the work that we need on the planet at the current time? It seems to me the Commonwealth, with its tremendous richness, cultural diversity, and its belief in spirituality, because it retained, in its constitutional structure, in its network, in its quaint old rituals and a respect for that dimension of life. So I think it's a positive message that I'm leaving people with, and the question is, how can we access that spiritual side of reality and then put it to work for the sake of the people of Gaza and Syria and Iraq and. So thank you.